Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 85. Militia Officer Curva walked nervously in the middle of her three-woman group. Their orders had been simple: to find the data servers in the observatory and grab all the hard drives. Group 2 was supposed to be setting the incendiary charges, but they had decided to check out the gift shop first. Now Curva and her team felt isolated. Comms had started to get all warbly and distorted before cutting out completely. Lights in the building randomly started flickering, and noises came from pretty much everywhere. The observatory felt haunted. As the trio pushed forward down a dim hallway, she started to hear an odd voice in her helmet's comms. It was so quiet. Curva strained and put all her attention into it, trying to pick out the words. "Are you gonna take me home tonight?" Swearing loudly, Curva let her rifle drop on its sling and tried to adjust her helmet volume. It wouldn't go lower. If anything, the bright human voice just got louder. Down beside that red firelight." She clawed at the chin strap of her helmet, twisting it until it finally came free. She ripped the helmet off with a passion that she normally only used to remove her bra after a particularly hot and sweaty work day, and flung it as far as she could. "Are you gonna let it all hang?" Oh! The helmet skittered across the ground. Her eyes followed it forward just in time to see a huge booted foot shoot out from a darkened side passage. It caught the point militia woman in the side and knocked her clean through the wall on the other side of the hallway. Plaster dust filled the air and terror made her bowels clench. She was a cop, not a soldier. All her misgivings about the assignment coalesced into a tight, molten ball of panic. Curva turned to run and froze. The officer behind her was standing oddly on her tiptoes, hands grasping spasmodically at her throat. The wire wrapped around her neck caught the light. A Shilvati with spiky black hair peered across from over her teammate's shoulder and grinned before pulling the garrote tighter. She had just enough time to realize she was doomed before a huge hand grabbed the side of Curva's head from behind and smashed it against the wall. Everything went black. "Come on, boy. Start stripping. We don't have a lot of time." Jemsai ignored the militia woman, instead focusing on what he could see out of the corner of his eye. Toral's finger moved gently on the floor where she lay prone and otherwise unmoving. 3 taps, 2 taps. Toral lunged from the floor, grabbing the second militia woman standing by the door. Her arms wrapped around the standing woman's leg and, with a savage motion, rammed a tusk directly into the back of her knee. The militia cunt screamed in pain as she collapsed. Jemsai's assailant turned, looking back at the pair of Shilvati wrestling on the floor. He made the most of the opportunity. As soon as he had seen Toral tapping her fingers, he had planned his next moves carefully. He darted to the side of the bed and came up with his sword. It had taken Jemsai months of training before he found what worked for him. The claymore was hilariously oversized, the arming sword better but too slow, especially for sparring with a human. Now, though, he had found his niche. 2 lessons a week for months, and even instructor Caitlin had to admit that Jemsai was becoming formidable with a backsword. The basket hilt fit his hand like a glove, and the single-edged blade, thin and straight as a laser, sang as it slipped from the scabbard. His would-be rapist noticed him then. Her hand began to scramble towards her pistol as Jemsai moved. In a calm brought from hundreds of hours of training, he felt a sort of detached surprise. Compared to instructor Caitlin, she was so damn slow. The parry against her raising pistol nearly took the woman's hand off at the wrist. Blue blood sprayed as Jemsai pulled back, reset into a high guard, and thrust. The blade, turned horizontal, slipped through the woman's throat and out the nape of her neck, only to rip out the side as Jemsai reset again. Reset. Guard. Move. He ignored the spray of blood, already dismissing his first target as she collapsed. Toril was winning her fight, on top of the other woman and raining down blows. You don't end up being co-wife with a Death's Head commando without learning a thing or two, but Jemsai still closed the distance and slipped the razor edge of his blade down and across militia woman's throat. She stopped struggling immediately as her life sprayed out in blue gouts of blood. What the fuck? Jemsai looked up to see the third militia woman, the one who had left the room to go piss, standing in the bathroom doorway. She had her rifle in her hands and, as she shouldered it, Jemsai realized that he was about to die. He squeezed his eyes shut. A loud crash accompanied the discharge of the rifle and Jemsai found himself on the floor, the wind knocked out of him and the weight of a body crushing down. His eyes popped open to see smooth grey skin and blue eyes so dark they were almost black looking down at him. The Helcom gave him a sharp-toothed smile. She was young and Jemsai thought her face was rather prettily proportioned, though a rough scar started at the bridge of her nose and ran diagonally up her forehead and into her hairline. The woman's short hair was black aside for a stripe of white that followed the line of the scar. Jemsai couldn't see what was happening, but the sounds of brutal violence and weapon fire were still reached him. He was content to stay under the Marine serving as a Helcom shield. Her smile slowly turned into a pained grimace. She planted her hands on the floor to either side of Jemsai's head and pushed, trying to climb off of him. Vesper? Fuck. Purple hands grabbed her shoulders and suddenly Jemsai was free. He scrambled to his feet. Two Marines that he recognized as the ones who followed Stace around were crouched over the Helcom. Toril was on her feet, a grotesque bruise just under her eye from where the now-dead militia officer had hit her with a rifle butt. The door into the suite was hanging oddly from the forced entry and all three militia members were on the ground. They would never be moving again. I'll be okay. Vesper hissed in pain through her teeth. Just get me up. Doesn't hurt. Jemsai leaned over to look. She was lying on her stomach and there was a horrifying burn centered on her back about halfway up. She had taken a shot that was clearly meant for him and, through the smoking hole in the back of her shirt, he could see the charred bones of her spine. One of the Marines tapped her ear, drawing Jemsai's attention to a headset. Quest, we have Jemsai. He and Toril are safe but Vesper needs medical attention. Where's Keller? Now that the crisis was winding down, Jemsai's chest felt tight. He plopped down on the bed and began to shiver. Toril sat down next to him, her much larger frame wrapping him in a hug. Jemsai leaned into his wife and tried to relax, letting his hands unclench and the sword tumble to the floor. Toril slipped out her pad from a pocket and started to make a call. She barely had it unlocked when a voice came out. It sounded artificial, strangely clear and emotionless. This is Questing for Great Truths. Keller and Ellora are in the observatory taking care of some looters. The scout team is on their way up to you, they had to make a couple stops on the way. Stay in your room. I trapped 4 idiots in the elevator and I'm afraid they are going to start trying to shoot through the door. Don't want you getting hit. The rest of the Marines are arming up and getting ready for the final push. What's the end game? Toril was all business, and as Jemsai snuggled tighter and his eyes slipped shut he thought he could sense pride in the artificial voice. Don't worry. This will be over in a few minutes. Keller Chelza moved silently through the observatory hallways. Now that she and Ellora were both properly armed with some commandeered rifles, this was going to be a lot easier. Ellora had pulled on a dead militia officer's body armor, but no way would any of that fit Keller and going somewhere else to grab proper gear would take way too long. The sound of voices in the gift shop grew louder as the pair moved. They reached the doorway and peered through. Ellora had her rifle up and was clearly ready to fire, but even with what was happening Keller didn't feel like killing more cops. Not if she could avoid it. She shook her head at the other Marine, then stepped out into the room. "Hello. I'm Keller Chelza. This is Lieutenant Ella Helium. You may have heard of us." The three militia women flinched and started to reach for their weapons, but stopped as soon as they saw Ella ready to take them out. "You two aren't on the list. Leave us alone and we'll leave you alone." The officer's voice sounded nervous, almost pleading. Her eyes flicked down the hallway Keller and Ella had come from. "Your friends are dead. Shouldn't have attacked my home." Ella's voice, on the other hand, was cool and confident. She used a finger to tap the body armor she was wearing, drawing attention to it. Keller noted how the fear played out in the militia's faces. "But I was just talking to them." "No. You were talking to me." The voice came from everywhere, every speaker in the room coming to life in a cacophony of sound. Hands reached up and grabbed at helmets, pulling them free to stop the din of the artificial yet still feminine voice. "Who? I am questing for great truths, and you miserable cunts are officially on my shit list. Every word you have said, every deed you have done is known to me." One of the militia officers snorted in amusement. She seemed to be finding her footing in the strange conversation. Perhaps she thought it was a bluff. "Turox shit. You are Militar Officer TR29372, Tenzi Pelter. You have 16.26 credits in your bank account. Every 2 weeks you have a standing appointment at a certain club in Albuquerque." Now the woman's face went pale, the purple of her skin turning nearly pink. The other two militia officers turned to her with interest, seemingly forgetting the danger under the lure of prime gossip. "You pay 300 credits an hour for a young human to tie you up, whip you, and degrade you. He calls you snookums and makes you lick his boots clean at the end of every session. I mean, I'm not a prude, but you go through a lot of effort to hide it, so I figured you're a bit ashamed. He doesn't particularly care for the boot thing, by the way. He finds it gross, but you insisted and you pay well, so he pretends to like it. At least you used to pay well. You couldn't afford the last 2 sessions. The first you paid for by trading drugs from the evidence locker. The second you paid for by stealing militia officer TR29357's personal belongings from the locker room and selling them. You bitch." Another one of the officers turned and raised her hands, preparing to throw a punch. The loud voice of Quest, still booming from everywhere, interrupted the conflict. "Stand by for an important announcement. Commander REM was not having a good day, but it could be worse." She stood on the landing pad with the militia captain and scout captain Pellick. She hadn't been disarmed, but the XO standing nearby, occasionally pivoting and spinning the barrels of its rotary laser, provided a strong deterrent against her actually taking direct action. The rest of her team, on the other hand. The tiny comm bead in REM's ear was piping her a wealth of information. That dear child had tapped into enemy communications, and the militia definitely were the enemy, and she now knew the extent of their operation. Even their chatter with the mics off was being picked up and recorded by Questing for Great Truths. As she explained, there was off and then there was off. The militia officers were completely unaware that they were transmitting everything back to the interior and the Marines. It turns out those two branches were more than willing to cooperate if it meant fucking up the militia. The militia captain was unaware as well. As far as she knew, the operation was going swimmingly. She got regular reports on the status of her teams, not knowing that Quest was mimicking their signals as Marines. The scout team, Ella, and Keller Chelza fought a bloody battle. Even Jemsai had apparently made a good accounting of himself. REM just wished she could somehow help. She couldn't guide the operation, make any commands, or really do much of anything without drawing attention to the deception. A sudden noise blared through every speaker at the painter facility, a loud tone that commanded everyone's attention. Commander REM glanced over at Scout Captain Pellick, who gave a bare hint of a nod. The tone was followed by a smooth, controlled voice. It was a voice used to giving commands and those commands being obeyed without question.
This is Provincial Governess Wasiro, speaking to everyone currently at the Painter Research Institute. All members of the militia are ordered to stand down, disarm, and report to Commander REM's Marine Detachment on site for arrest and processing. Failure to do so will result in immediate execution for treason against the Shilvati Empire.
REM locked eyes on the militia captain in front of her. They were no more than a meter apart. The captain was half REM's age, fitter, and better armed. It wasn't even close. As the officer reached for her sidearm, REM closed the distance and swung. Her arm, a rather clunky prosthetic of purple shield metal, collided with the younger woman's face before her hand had even closed around the pistol. She collapsed instantly, spitting blood and broken teeth. REM drew her own pistol, set it to stun, and shot the woman in the face. It was only then that she remembered the exo. Or immediately replaced any fear in REM's mind. Pellick was charging the combat exoskeleton, moving faster than any person REM had ever seen. She wasn't running, exactly, each bounding step moved her farther than should be possible. Pellick was sort of kicking off from each leg, throwing herself forward meters at a time. It was both mesmerizing and wholly unnatural. The exo tried to track the woman, its rotary barrel laser causing sections of the landing pad to pop and spatter under the heat of the beams, but the scout captain was too fast. She juked from side to side until she finally leapt forward, swinging her right arm down in a palm strike directly onto the exo's pilot hatch. A blinding flash seemed to fill the world and it took REM a few moments to blink away the spots in her eyes. When she could finally see again, she first noticed the exo. It was standing right where it had before, only now there was a smoking hole the size of a woman's head in the center of the cockpit hatch. Dark smoke and the smell of burning meat poured out of the hole. Pellick slowly tried to pull herself to her feet. REM ran to the scout and put an arm around her, helping drag the younger woman up. Her right arm ended just below the elbow in a twisted and smoking ruin of metal and flesh, blue blood and some sort of dark oil dripping from it. It seemed like every centimeter of the woman was weeping blood from some minor cut or abrasion. What in the name of the goddess? Pellick grinned an exhausted, toothy smile. Plasma lance. Only good for one shot, but damn if it isn't effective.
Treason against the Shilvati Empire.
Jessica kept her ear pressed to the door, listening quietly. Spreads the word through Noble Service had been doing everything in his power to keep them distracted, but now that the militia officers in the medical wing knew they were fucked, she didn't know what they would do. Well, it looks like that's that. Go ahead and put your weapons down. I'll wait. The voice of the Gear Child Surgeon Priest was calm and collected. He really did give off kindly grandpa vibes. Jessica couldn't quite hear the response from the Shilvati, but it didn't sound pleasant. All right then. I suppose if you don't want to be civil about this, words sounded disappointed more than scared. Jessica raised her pistol and began to reach for the door handle. Then the screaming started. It only lasted a couple of seconds, Shilvati letting free shouts of primal, visceral pain and terror. The next few seconds were a terrible silence, followed by a clear and pleasant voice. The voice of a kindly old man. Jessica, can you ask a Skell to come and assist me? I may have gone a bit overboard. Regional Governess Elinke reached out as she stepped between the wall of bodies formed of her militia, pulling a pistol from one officer's holster. She waved it casually about as she spoke, causing the nobles to back away from the prone form of Eustace Grant. You know, I really think I hate you, she said pleasantly, pointing the pistol vaguely in the direction of the man. You never should have left your little mountain. All my work is spoiled because of you. You and House Chelsea and all those cunts at that goddess-forsaken museum in the desert. If he wasn't there, we would have died in that bar. The woman from House Orlan was trying to keep her voice even, though it hitched as the waving pistol swung past her. You think I give a shit about you? Elenki sneered. If you all died in that bar, I could have really cracked down on these gutter-stiff humans. I could have squeezed them hard. Instead, it's all gone to shit, and it's thanks to this, she sighed, then pointed the pistol at the human on the floor. No. Dali Elenki stepped in front of her mother, blocking the shot. Mom, you can't do this. Regional Governess Elenki's hand did not waver, the pistol pointing at her daughter. Of course I can. He's a terrorist, the regional governess says so, so it must be true. If you want to protect him, Dali, that just means you're a terrorist too. It has to be this way. What has gotten into you? You were bad before, but not, Dali sniffed. Not a monster. Elenki gave her daughter a pleasant smile, lowering the pistol towards the floor. Now. I may be a monster, but you're something much worse. The pistol raised back up, pointing directly at Dali's chest. A disappointment. Elenki squeezed the trigger and the pistol snapped out its high-pitched discharge. Her daughter slumped to the floor and everyone was treated to a moment of stillness before their world exploded. The ballroom windows burst inward, showers of stained glass followed by grenades releasing some sort of stinging gas. Shouts and the sounds of gunfire erupted in all directions. Stace didn't care. He crawled his way over to the prone form of Dali Elenki. The tear gas, or whatever it was, made his left eye sting, but it wasn't nearly as bad on his prosthetic. His mouth and tongue were going numb, but his lungs didn't seem to notice it at all. The girl had a smoking hole high on her chest about the width of Stace's thumb. It went right through the decorative armor she was wearing, and deep blue blood seemed to be pumping out of the hole in rapid spurts. There was so much blood, and given the location. Squeezing his eyes shut, Stace slipped his arm under Dali's armor. It was a tight fit, but he wiggled his wrist, fingers splayed out until he found the wound. Saying a quick prayer that whatever goddess the Shilvati prayed to was paying attention, he shoved 2 fingers into the hole and pushed. The young woman screamed out, a howl that turned into a sob near the end, but Stace ignored it. His fingers twisted and probed, his concentration total. He had to find. There it was. He pressed his fingers tight and hoped he was slowing the bleeding enough to buy time. She tried to save his life, and Stace would be damned if he didn't return the favor. Jelsai shoved through the crowd, trying to keep what little shred of calm she had intact. The marine assault had been brilliant, stun grenades and gas followed by 2 exos busting through the walls and massed stun rifle fire. Regional Governess Elenki was in custody, none of the guests had died as far as she knew, and now Jelsai needed to find Stace. He was surprisingly easy to find. The man was laying on top of a young girl, covered in blood, and yelling something in English. A marine with a medic insignia was yelling back in Shil. Stace! Stace! She managed to get his attention and the human seemed to calm down a little. What's going on? You need to speak, Shil. The human took a couple deep breaths, focusing. He seemed to be having trouble stringing his words together. There's a hole just above her heart. Stace stared off into the distance for a moment, mouthing words to himself before continuing. Ascending aorta. If I pull out my, he wiggled the fingers of his other hand. She'll die. Oh. She turned to the medic. Can you handle that? The look on the marine's face turned grave. No. If he has the hole plugged, it's better he doesn't move. She tapped the communication stud on her chest. We need a trauma team to the main ballroom to treat a possible aortal dissection. It's currently being held in place manually. Time is a factor. Jelsai crouched down next to Stace and took his free hand. His outfit was ruined, he was smeared with Shilvati blood, and the look of concentration on his face was total. Stace seemed to be keeping this young woman alive with nothing more than sheer force of will. Jelsai felt something clench inside her, a sort of spreading warmth. To her, he had never looked more beautiful. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff. Visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.